Hello, Wild and Well listeners. Thank you for joining us for He Said, She Said. It is John and Becca here. And we are in January 2026 now. And both of us, we just were talking in the prep, are a little out of it. So bear with us. But it is a Wednesday morning for you all to listen to this. And we are so glad that you're here. This is one of our most important topics. It's the stories we tell ourselves. The theme of the week is this idea that some of us have quiet narratives shaped by shame, hope, and everything we've learned about who we're supposed to be. So through the lens of storytelling and shared humanity, we'll explore how these inner stories influence our emotions, our relationships, and our sense of worth. And so we'll get into that in a little bit. But before we get into our stories and the things we tell ourselves, John, what's your high-low buffalo of the week?
I'm going to start with a great high. Went steelhead fishing with my father-in-law. Pulled him. I said, "You're going." We kidnapped him and took him fishing, which was great to get him out of his routine. And I caught my personal best steelhead. Oh, I'm just riding high. That was my outro to 2025, which felt very good.
Love that. And a steelhead is at 6, 12, 24 inches. Give me.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. 27 inches. And steelhead is a rainbow trout that lives in the river, but then goes out to the ocean, lives for a couple of years, and then comes back in. So they're very cool. They're like unicorn fish. Yeah, they're very cool fish, and it was fun to do that. Low, who can relate? We were nap trapped by the 11-month-old. Couldn't leave the house. It was cold outside. It's raining. Gnarly sickness. Taking its sweet time to move through the household. Patient A infected, patient B 2 days later just staggered slowly. So we're all under the weather and it moved through us slowly. That was definitely our low. And then my buffalo, or cow, if you will, for the week. So I'm at my in-laws' house. You've been there. It's where
Beautiful.
when I got married. And we're I look out in the field that we got married in, and it's next to a cow pasture. And a cow had crossed the fence. So my dog goes after it. Is chasing this cow around, and then the cow jumps over the fence or through the fence. My dog goes through the fence as well. He's looking for a dust up. Okay. He says, I've had a little taste of this and I want more.
Yeah.
So he tries to take on the herd. At this point, I'm running after the dog, going back, yelling, "We got to get him." Running after the dog, or as to which way is faster. Do I get the car? Do I just keep running to him? And he's running around this herd, and he runs into the bull. He didn't get the horns of the bull, but he caught a hoof, and he came back with his tail tucked, but he's fine. Okay, he's good. Got him checked out. Everything's good. But it was like 10 minutes of chaos, which in hindsight is pretty funny. But at the time it was pretty intense.
Yeah. And let's call it what it is. He gets a hoof to the chest. He gets for sure if he gets a horn, right?
Yeah.
I grew up with some cows back in the day. That's no bueno. And so, yikes. Okay.
Yeah. So you got to learn some lessons the hard way. He gave the cows adequate space after that, and there were no cattle crossing property lines as well. How about you? Back to you. High-low buffalo.
My low is that we're sick. It's now coming through. I'm hoping and praying that we don't get the flu bad. We've had some friends that have had it really gnarly, like hospitalization. So I'm really hopeful for that.
Yeah.
My high is that we had a really sweet Christmas. We were here this year and it was calm. And
Great.
so I'm kind of on the inverse, which is always nice to have that. So I hear you because I've been where you've been or adjacent to that. And this year was the opposite, and it was super low key, and that was actually okay. So coming off of that, and then shwabam, 2026, hello sickness. So
Yeah.
playing that dance right there. And then my buffalo, I'm going to go there. It's a little bit political. I am trying to hold space of curiosity for what the junk's happening between Trump and Venezuela and everything. And I don't really have more besides what's the play.
Yeah.
And we could get into a lot of that. That's not what this podcast is for.
Yeah.
But I'm finding myself, my buffalo is that I'm finding myself being drawn back to the curiosity of it and trying to remain in that rather than the attacking, rather than the statement oriented towards anyone, and just saying like, all right, where's this 6 months from now? Where's this a year from now? And seeing celebrations and also seeing sadness and all of that. And so I come into the place of what's the play?
Yeah,
so
totally.
Real wild buffalo. Don't normally bring in politics, but I'm finding it's holding weight for me.
It was not on our bingo card, frankly. And that's funny you say that. My oldest daughter and I were talking about nuances of these scenarios. It's not all good. It's not all bad. And having to live with the lack of discreteness, right? Like it's not just X or just Y. And as you learn more, it creates more questions. So I'm in a similar place. I'm in a similar place.
And I haven't been. I've traveled quite a bit. I've lived abroad. I'm married to an immigrant family, like, but I've yet to go to Venezuela. So I also don't know it from firsthand.
Yeah, of
And so that's
course.
where I'm also saying, hey, let me listen because I don't have that firsthand experience there. Let me just
Yeah.
call this out. If you're watching us, not just listening to us, I find myself hiding this and this being my mug because it says it's a boy. This is not a birth announcement. I'm not pregnant. I've had a hysterectomy. That's part of my own story, but I'm highly efficient, especially when we're sick. And this was the first one out. So I'm holding a mug that says it's a boy, but I'm not going to hide it anymore because there's nothing to hide. So,
I'm just disappointed I didn't grab my Mrs. mug that's in the
Miss
cabinet over there.
Please do. That could be our own thing is what do we roll in with? What mugs do we have in our cupboards? I love
Uh-huh.
that. But yeah, no, wanting to honor that space. And so I know politics play into it. And so not shying away and also saying, I don't have the answers. And especially as we talk about storytelling and the things that play through our own heads, I have lots of emotions. I have lots of feelings and thoughts. And so saying, okay, how do I break this reel up? Because as I'm talking to my kids, they love to travel. They love people from all over the world. And also, they don't need to hold the space of the Venezuela US conflict or whatever it might be even right now.
No.
And so that's where I'm like, okay, how do I then separate myself, roll out of those stories, those reels playing in my brain, and come back to the present moment? And so that's even a little snippet into one of the reels that's playing through my head right now.
Yeah, totally. I think it's safe to say that we don't need to burden our kids with geopolitical events before the age of 10.
Yeah.
But sometimes they see what's on the news, the news is on. But this is that's a good reminder too that we don't need to bring them into this stuff
Yeah.
early. It's just it doesn't serve anyone really.
For sure. Some of the reels that are playing in so our son turns 5 in March. One of the reels that's playing are dreams now he's starting to have, and he'll share it in the morning, and he's like, "Mom, I was Spidey last night, and I got to fight dinosaurs." And I'm like, "Those are the dreams I want you to have." How do we continue to facilitate space for you to have awesome dreams like that and not geopolitical or other tension when we don't need to have it, right? Like, I can't make a
Yeah.
change currently. As it sits, I cannot make a change in the greater scheme of geopolitical conversations. And so, yeah, how do I then hope for the dinosaurs and the
I'll
Spideys
say
coming out?
this. I want whatever milk brand you guys are giving him before bed because that dream sounds awesome.
Right?
It sounds way
Right?
better than the alternative.
Man,
Yeah.
I hear you. All right, let's get into then for the introduction. I want to take us through one of the things when we're talking about stories is we have shame-based stories, we have hope-filled stories, we have the roles we play within our own genders, within birth orders. There's so many different
Mm,
complexities that play into why we have stories. And I know you and I both talk about shame that we have, how that captures us and almost shackles us into living then out I am statements and assumptions about ourselves. And so I want to take us through an exercise that I do with students and clients, and this is not therapeutic in its nature. Sure, there's evidence-based research and there's all these things, but this is not a therapy session. This is simply a practice that any of us can do. If we need deep therapy in this, which many of us do, that is where then I would encourage us to seek that out elsewhere, and find that there's some really great mental health providers around the country and around the world. And so coming into the here and now, though, this is an exercise I want us to go through. All right, John, I'm going to have you be listening and think about this scenario. Can we pause and pick a recent moment where your inner story got loud? What was the thought? What feeling followed? And what might be a more balanced or compassionate reframe for yourself? So I'm going to say it again. Think of an inner story that was really loud, that was screaming at you about yourself.
mm.
What was the thought?
Okay. Luckily for both of us, or unfortunately, I don't have to look today. This is unfolding. So the context here is I'm having foot surgery tomorrow. And the thought or what I'm telling myself is that I don't want to be a burden.
Mm,
And I don't want to be a burden on my wife more than I already am going to be. I'm going to be a burden on my kids and my wife during this time where I'm on crutches, basically incapacitated for like 4 weeks. So the thought is I shouldn't be a burden and I should and I have done to take as much cooking preparation off my family around me to take that burden off of my wife. So what the feeling is stress, tension, tightness in my chest, anticipation, just do instead of maybe stop and pausing and thinking about this or maybe writing a plan a little bit. And what's the third part?
and then the third part is reframe it. Yeah, no. And then the third part is where the change happens. So right now
Yeah.
you've said, like, if I'm hearing you correctly, you've said, I think that I'm a burden. And then the feeling that I have is stress, tension, tight chest even. And
Yeah.
so then the reframe is, what's a truer or kinder story than you are a burden?
Yeah. So, and I want to come back to patterns later, but I have a pattern of don't be a burden. And this is the pattern for me that's showing up in this scenario. And so to answer the third part is my family's happy to take care of me. I'm not a burden. I'm a blessing to them as they are to me. And actually, by doing all this cooking, I'm probably underserving my family in other ways. But I feel like that's what I need to take that off of them. So I've cognitively arrived at that, but I need to then maybe spiritually or emotionally follow through to that. And then physically, which is like, don't cook anymore today. Don't keep adding things and do other stuff that might be helpful.
Yeah.
It took me time to realize that this is the story I'm telling myself. It took me more than 24 hours. And unfortunately, it came to a head today, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that because that is real for so many. And as I think through my day being sick, it's interesting that you say that, like, don't be a burden. I rephrase as my daughter's yelling and saying, Mom, I just play with me, just play with me. And I'm Nick's doing Legos with our son. Lulu is now napping what she needed to do, but she was so exhausted and I'm taking a nap because, like I said, I've been sick. And so what's the reel that's playing, the thought that's playing is, I'm a bad mom.
Mm,
I am a bad mom. I could give you 55,000 other statistics that says that that's not true. But
yeah.
as I'm laying there and she's saying, Mama, please come play with me, the real isn't, oh yeah, let's get up and go. Or the real isn't, I love you. The real isn't, Micah, you are sick. Give yourself grace or realize that other people can take her or that she's resilient, right? None of those are playing through my head. If
Yeah.
I'm honest with myself, it's you're a bad mom or
Yeah.
I'm a bad mom. And so then the feeling is shame. The feeling is laziness. The feeling is an exhaustion that then goes into the brain of, do I get up when I know that sleeping is the best remedy right now?
Yeah.
Or do I, yell for Nick? What do I do? But the feeling goes back to a harbored feeling from the past.
Yeah.
And then so the framework for me would be, you're a great mom and you're sick, Becca.
Mm,
Those are both true. You are sick and you're a great mom. And so I had to remind myself that. And then I made myself a pot of coffee and, some of those things. And then she's asleep now and she's resting. She's doing what she needs. But more importantly, if I don't reframe and if you don't reframe, then we still continue to do all the do's. So you continue to cook or
yeah.
I continue to play with her. But then I don't actually stop and say, oh, wait, I'm not a burden. I'm actually a blessing. Or I don't
Yeah.
stop and say, oh, wait, I'm a really great mom. Here's how, here's why, right? We
Yep.
forget if we don't do that reframe. So that's why it's a three-part. I appreciate you sharing this as we walk through it because we didn't prep in that. And so it's vulnerable. And what I
Yeah.
would ask for people is write down this. We'll put it in our weekly newsletter. If you want to get those, please go onto our website. We have a place where you can fill it out. It's the first thing that pops up. But we give these practical applications now on the newsletters. They started last week. Is thought, what did I tell myself? Feeling, what showed up in my body or my emotions? And then the reframe, what's a truer or kinder story? And the reality is, we don't have to share these out to each other, right? There's some
Yeah.
accountability in that when we do, and there's growth and bravery. But ultimately, if I was to write this down on a sticky note every day, when I start to process at the end of the day, man, what's something negative I told myself? What's a story that isn't true that I told myself that I thought it was in the moment? And
Yeah.
so, any other things that you have yet there as far as this exercise goes?
Yeah. I think that this is, so I want to talk a little bit about patterns.
Please.
And this is a great way to disrupt the pattern because what I've found is that the more I identify a pattern, which I'll define in a second, it allows me to say, hey, I'm doing that thing I do again. Let me just put it in its place. Like, don't believe what you're telling yourself in this moment. And some scenarios, it's easier to recognize that. Others, it's harder. And you're doing the thing, you're telling yourself the story for much longer than you should be, in my experience. So I think that exercise is really useful because it's like anything else. When you get in the practice of it, or even do it once or twice, it might come up again and can kind of de-escalate these stories that we tell ourselves that don't really serve us.
Let's get into some of those patterns and whatnot, or where you see that, because the exercise we just did is in the framework of Stoicism, and then which is like the forefather of CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. And
Yeah,
so, for people who are like, "Hey, this is really resonating," when you do see a therapist, be like, "Hey, do you do CBT work?" Because it's this breaking up of the mind and the feelings of the behaviors, and so rewiring our brain to recognize what's true, and that's very high level. And so, if this is resonating for someone, either utilize it every day as you are, because we do have healing within us. Our bodies
yeah,
are an amazing healing vessels. And also if we need more work, go see a therapist. And so for you though, I want to give a little bit of context and then I'd love to hear some like patterns or how they form because like a majority of these stories come from or are shaped from our early attachment to caregivers, culture and
Totally.
gender norms, trauma, loss, or rejection. And then this repeated feedback of you're too much, man up, be grateful, don't fail. And
Work
so
harder.
work harder. And
Yep.
those become those core beliefs. And so that's where I want to go into whether high level or very specific. How did you see patterns form? And then how did you specifically learn to interrupt them?
Some of the setup you have here is, I think, is really helpful, which is a lot of these are shame based. But here's the tricky thing with patterns is, well, let me define it first. Okay. They are learned, compulsive, automatic, and reactive. Okay. So
Okay.
learned happens over time. Compulsive, it's almost like we can't even control it. Automatic is it stimulus, it happens, it goes. Right. And reactive is it takes that stimulus for it to go. And the thing that's messed up is that they often serve us. Patterns serve us, right? They made a shame story that we carry may lead to things like high achievement or crises averted or avoiding vulnerability or insert number of things. Patterns exist because they serve us in some capacity. That could be outward success or it's extrinsic or intrinsically as a coping mechanism. And you might say that some patterns show up in people's personality. It's just part of who they are. So these patterns live in us. It's either a pattern that I do it to myself, so I criticize myself. I do it to others, criticize others, right? Because it's some reflection of a narrative that's being told. And I think I'm then go to a place that I need to criticize others because it's contra to the narrative that I have in my mind. And then perhaps in some of the worst case scenarios, like it attracts others who do this to us. So maybe the patterns can bring significant people into my life who are critical or do things or say things that are unbecoming of who we want to be. And we set up others to do it to us. I want to be cautious to say that all patterns are negative because some of them are really good. As an example, I have a pattern on a story that I tell myself is, hey, whatever the situation is, I'll manage, I'll improvise, I'll figure out a way to get out of it. And sometimes I love the thrill of that. I love being late for a flight sometimes and figuring out how I get on that flight. I love how the red tape gets caught.
I
And
love that.
that's a good thing. But also that might mean that I show up late to something that I should show up on time for. Like just show up
So
on
good.
time.
Yep.
So it's not all bad and depends on the situation. Work harder is one of my stories, the stories that I tell myself. You're not working hard enough. If you just work harder, that's the way to get out of it. And there've been a lot of things. Like I could look at a house that I've renovated. I could look at parts of my career. I could look at whatever it may be where it's served me well. And I could also look at other areas of my life where the answer wasn't to work harder, it's probably to work smarter or work differently or to put the shovel down altogether and take a step back.
I'm gonna push into that for a minute and I'll share mine. Is do you tell yourself that how funny you are? Is that something that you wear too? Like, is that a narrative of I'm a funny person?
Good question. I think I used to more in the past. I'll meet certain people that are like actors and I'm like, oh man, this is juicy. I want to get more out of this interaction. Like, I want to see you go to it. And like, not in a manipulative way, but let's dance a little bit, like
Yeah.
mentally. And I think that leads to a place of humor, but I don't say, John, you are like Eddie Murphy. I wish I told myself that.
Me though is let's say I only said that about you because I do. I think you're so funny.
Oh, thank
And
you.
I always have. That's just like it's a joy to be around you. However, if I only put that on you, what
Yeah.
about the other complexities of who you are? I wanted you to
Yeah.
play out authentically before I went into this space because I already had the story in my head about you. So
Yep.
please hear me say this is me playing this out of when we all have stories about each other. I could throw out names, right? Let's say I throw out Oprah Winfrey. I throw out Donald Trump. I throw out China. I throw out cruises in the Caribbean. I throw out
Mm-hmm.
whatever. It could be so random. Elementary school, kindergarten teacher,
Yep.
whatever. Stories automatically come to our minds.
Yes.
Words automatically flood us. And so then we start to have those reels play of do I fit in this box? Do they fit in this box?
So
Yeah.
in this case, so let's just say like I'm really passive. I'm setting up I have a pattern because I say don't be a burden. I'm really passive and I'm letting other people's make decisions for my life. That would be an unhealthy pattern. And I'm setting up others to do it for me.
I'm tracking with you then. And then so for humor, That's where I'm like, if you were only that, or if I placed that on you, my relationship
Yeah.
with you, my criticism, if I said, oh, John's only funny, I can't have a deep conversation. That is
Yeah.
obviously so different because for those of you just tuning in, John and I go back to kindergarten and we have mad respect for each other and have dug into hard things in life and been vulnerable with some of those things over the years. And so that is not a true statement. I value you in your complexities.
Thank you.
I think
Thank you.
often we do that though to other people and to ourselves, right? I'm
Totally.
laying there sick today and I say, oh, I'm a bad mom. It has nothing to do with motherhood. I'm literally so sick. Yet why does my brain say, you're a bad mom, you're a bad mom, you're a bad mom,
Yeah.
right? And so how do we then come back to this place of releasing that criticism and coming out of that either for others or for ourselves when we're in the storytelling, the reels going off in our head?
Yeah. And the way you're describing this makes me think like another way of looking at it is we either depict ourselves or we depict others around us as actors that always play the same role. You know what I mean? Like there's certain actors that they only play villains or they only play this goofy type. There's something there as well, which is as you tell yourself these stories about yourself or telling yourself stories about other people, there is there's a the way that to break this cycle, and this is where I'm going to put it back to you, but the best way that I know to break this cycle um, is really to, if it's in between impulse and reaction, that's where the freedom of choice is. So like you said those words, right? China, Trump, whatever it may be, we have a knee-jerk reaction, but before we talk, before we do, before we, whatever it may be, taking a moment. And this is where we have to get to know ourselves a lot better. It took me a long time and I'm still on this journey, right? But it's that moment between the stimulus and the reaction. That's the freedom of choice. And I wish there were more practical and tactical ways to do it. Maybe you have more, but that's the gold standard. Like that is the silver bullet. The only way that I found to do it is with self work. And I fall in traps. Like today, I've not been a pleasant person to be around because I've told myself that I should not be a burden. And I made some people around me not very comfortable and unhappy. But here we are, 8 hours later, I've identified this pattern and I'm changing the narrative for the rest of the day, whatever's left.
And how awesome is that for your crew around you? Because you've been able to say that, dinner's going to be so much more pleasant. Bedtime's going to be so much more pleasant. Tomorrow has opportunity to, right? That's those changes when we recognize that in the patterns. And for me, I'm someone who, when something happens and I don't control it and I just have a quick response and I can't name it, I get really quiet and reserved. And Nick is very gracious and also able. He has almost a superpower power to be like, hey, Beck, something's up. And I'll be like, no, it's not. And he's like,
Mm,
all right, like I'm not gonna pry. And yet something's up and I'm like, dang it. Like it is.
yeah,
I can't name it either, but something's off. And so us then saying, hey, I have the agency to change it. I can.
yeah,
And sometimes it takes time to do so, or it always takes time. Sometimes that's shorter, sometimes that's longer. But coming to a place of how do I break that reel? Because I start to become insecure or I start to think negative things instead of just going and playing with my daughter or creating joy in the house. And it doesn't mean we have to be the life givers always. Often though, when we can interrupt these negative things about ourselves, life is more joy filled. Life
yeah,
is more full. And it's like, oh, let me just get out of my head. So two practical ways, because you talked about the stimulus, or two practical sayings, and it is always doing work with myself. And so I'm on the becoming. I have some of the being of this, and I still am becoming. And I think it's a lifelong practice. From the Buddhist side, there's a phrase: if we're going to ruminate or if we're going to overthink all the time,
mhm.
why not teach our brain to overthink about hopeful things?
Oh,
Your brain to think about happy things. Teach your brain to think about productive things over and over again. Because so many
yeah,
of us, when we say, oh, I ruminated on this or I overthought this, it automatically goes to something hard, something fear based, something shame based. It doesn't go to, well, I thought I was going to win $1 million, or oh, I thought that I was going to have a really great day at work tomorrow and I just couldn't stop thinking about that. People will be
yeah,
like, that's delusional. But why? We do it for the negative. So why can't we train our brain for the positive? So that's a Buddhist thought. And then on the spirituality side of Christianity, there's, again, I'm gonna have to look up who it is, but there's a pastor who says, our first thought is not our responsibility.
uh,
Our first
wow,
action and our second thought
mm,
is our responsibility. So to your point, that between the stimulus and the response, whatever comes to my brain first is what it is. The second piece though is, okay, let's say my son jumps on my foot by accident. I'm like, oh, my first response then could be, and I go off on him. Or I could say, oh, that really hurt. And I could start
Yeah.
jumping up and down trying to make it a light situation. Or I could say, hey, mom just needs a moment. You're not in trouble. I just need a moment, right? There's so many different ways I could do it. So my first reaction, my first like inner thought, the dialogue, the storytelling is, mother, oh,
Hey, sis, been there on both sides of it.
yes,
Amen.
exactly. And then the space is, oh, wait, I could chew my son out right now because
Yeah.
that's the response. I could. Or I could, or I could walk out. I could slam a door. I could let out whatever. Or I can say, holy cow, that really hurt. I just need a moment, like I just said. And so figuring out how can I start taking back the agency, the control. Can you imagine the dialogue that we would have across cultures, across political spectrums if we took our first thought, released it, took the shame away of that, and then said, all right, now what do I want to say next? Or what's my next action?
Yeah. So I've got two things. One of the things that I found in talking with other people about this is that naming what patterns are out there is really helpful, or what stories. So you have some great ones here. I want you to share that. But I would say this: a lot of them are shame based. In my experience, other people I've talked to, and a lot of that shame based comes from childhood. And I was reflecting on this morning, and the question I have, or maybe rhetorical question, is it possible that we over our praise the control or agency of the situation that happened to us or we participated in the past, especially in our youth, and then we underappraise the agency or control we have in the present to change our situation? This thing happened to me when I was
Yep.
a kid, right?
Yep.
And we're talking small moments. It could be true, like what traumatic with a capital T,
Yeah.
or traumatic with a small t, where we felt embarrassed or whatever it may be. But there's a shame narrative that is fueled from presumably some part of you in the past, a lot of times from being a kid. And we assume guilt of that, or we assume that that's our fault. And then, but in the current circumstance, and I should say, as a kid, you have a lot less agency. You don't know the world, right? But in this current circumstance, we then are become victims of our emotions. We become victims of our circumstance, whatever it may be. And so it should be reversed, right? This thing happened to me as a kid. I only had so much control in that situation. And then currently I'm an adult. I'm a real person. I'm able to take accountability, and I'm empowered to not allow the guilt to override, or the shame to override.
Yeah.
Well,
Now that you've painted it beautifully, we ask it again since we didn't do prep on
yeah.
that. Yeah, sit in that for a sec.
So is it possible that we over appraise the control and agency of ourselves to a situation in the past, especially in our youth, and we underappraise the agency or control we have in the present to change our situation?
Yes. So if I'm hearing that correctly, it is I can't change the past. I can change my response to the past. That's
Mm-hmm.
how I would answer that.
Yeah.
Is we give so much agency to well, this affected me of the past. This is a trauma and it holds me. It binds me into that space. So both you and I, unfortunately, have had knee issues. I'm going to make a parallel here between physical and emotional. You and I both have had knee issues, many surgeries between the two of us, unfortunately. I still have tightness in my knee. For 5 years now, I have not worked out to the extent that I've wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
One of my goals at the end of December turned into a commitment that I'm going to do high rocks. So a competition with Nick's
Wow.
next fall.
Nice.
We're going to do co-ed. Why not? Because
Yeah.
here's the thing though, is my knee has to get in shape. It's an 8K, which is not a ton, but at the same time, I can't do an 8K. My knee will hurt. If I do it
Yeah.
tomorrow, my knee would hurt really, really bad. And so I tore my ACL in 2007 and then again in 2011. So it's been
Mm-hmm.
almost 20 years and then a little bit less than that. And so in that, I still have scar tissue. I have bone on bone. I have some pains there. However, I've also actively chosen to get my quads and hamstrings and my calves and stretching and different things stronger and more mobile. And so
Yep.
I'm actively choosing to heal some of those things from the past. I also am saying, hey, what are tools currently available? There's now something at the gym that we go to. It's called an air runner. It's like a treadmill, but it's got a scoop to it. I've never seen these before.
Yeah.
I was so hesitant. I used every excuse in the book to say, Brian's one of our coaches. I'm like, I'm not getting on there. For the last
Yeah.
year, I'm not getting on there. I will walk. I will put it to level 7 as if I'm doing sled pushes. I will build up the strength around it, but I'm not running. This is last week. He goes, Beck, just try it. And I tried it and my knee didn't hurt. And
Wow.
I'm like, so do I hold myself in the past and say, but I have heard it twice, so it's going to
Yeah.
hurt again, right? Those are the trends you're talking about, or those are the patterns where I know the excuses, but also the pains that I've had. And that's just the physical side. And so saying, then parallel it to now of the traumas that we have that are more emotional, intellectual, whatnot, cognitively based. do I hold myself in that tension of the past, or do I say, here's different tools I can use in 2026? Here's ways I can find healing. The body does an amazing job. Yes, their body does hold tension. Yes, the body does remember, but the body also heals. It's incredible on a micro and macro level. It's amazing how the body
Yeah.
heals. And that includes the emotional side. So my response would be yes to your question. We are in a season of life and in psychology where we say, hey, let's focus on the past. That's why we have high rates of depression, because we're looking back. And
Yeah.
we don't give agency to saying, hey, we can also find healing. What happened in the past is valid. It is so valid. And there needs to be supports around and tools around to find healing. And also, we can find the healing and do the healing through community, through practical, applicable tools, through different stimuli and response. So what I would say through that is yes to your answer. Putting it back on you, do you feel like where you were at 20 compared to 15 years later, almost 15 years later,
Hmm.
do you feel like you've seen that arc or that journey change from I'm held by the past and the shackles of the past to I can give myself one foot in front of the other to build that agency?
Without a doubt. I mean, look, this is not a discussion I'd be having when I was 20 or 25 or 27. So I didn't know what patterns were, but had an experience where I did identify my patterns, and it comes back to authenticity. We've talked about authenticity in prior discussions. The pausing between the stimulus and the reaction allows me and allows others, I would put forward, to live authentically and not be like just at the whim of a story that we told ourselves, which is misinformed, which is led from comes from a place in time that we had way less agency or control. And we have a lot more agency and control in the present than we did then. So that it's a leading question for me. Yes, the answer is yes. And I'm also very glad to say that I have progressed from when I was 20 to now to avoid these things.
Because you're doing the work. You've talked about the
The Hoffman
Hoffman
Institute, yeah.
Institute. That's a practical tool. I'm not familiar with them except for through what you've shared.
Yeah.
And so high level, what's like a elevator pitch for them or how it's impacted you? What would be your Google review?
Oh man. The Hoffman process allowed me to know myself in ways that I didn't before, and to confront the patterns that don't serve me, and to celebrate and enjoy the like what life brings at me. Life is rocky. That will always be, that's a constant. But the Hoffman process allowed me to, and continues to allow me to confront this as it comes up on a daily basis. It's not for just one type of person. You pull out the pickaxe and you're doing some self work for a week, and it's the real deal.
It's changed your life and enhanced your life, if I can say that for you as a friend, in ways that are just starting to come out, even in ways that have radically changed your and Miriam's relationship, I'm sure, and how you parent and how you exist in the workplace and all of that. And
Yeah.
so again, a space for you to say, shout out to the Hoffman Institute and another tool for people to explore. One that I'm not familiar with, and that's okay. That's
Yeah.
the beauty of it, is that we each are on our own journey trying to figure this out. And so with the time that we have left, I do want to run through some of the common misconceptions or stories that we as women are taught and men, and then how to
Totally.
practically combat them or do some of these things that you're talking about where you say, hey, it doesn't mean that these don't come through my head. When they do, though, they move through and they don't hold me and shackle me to the past, to depression, to, or even if I have depression, for those of us that do, it's more of a choose your own adventure as opposed to being shackled without agency, as we've used that word over and over again too.
Yeah.
So common stories that women are taught: be pleasing, not powerful. Don't take up too much space. Your worth is in being needed, right? That would be what mine was today, is my only worth is in being a mom. And so since I'm not being a mom, I'm not even good at it. You should be grateful. Others have it worse. Common stories men are taught: don't feel, fix. Your value is your usefulness. Vulnerability is weakness. If you fail, you are a failure.
Mm.
And so those are all often, I'm only worthy when I'm performing well. We talk about this a lot in the work that I do, is how do we remove performance into authenticity? How do
Mm.
we turn that into who am I trying to please? Probably myself often, and then sometimes others, but who am I trying to please? And how do I then work it into a space or learn and say, I'm existing. I don't need to be anything more than who I am now. The human I am currently, this being versus becoming, or this being and becoming, I'm worthy because I am human, and I can also grow into a more authentic person, a person that contributes differently, a person who gets up and does some things, whatever it may be that we need to grow into, we can, but it doesn't hold us to I am so and so, especially a shame based, loud voice. So back to just real quick, real time, saying instead of is this story true, we say what evidence supports this thought. So today, what evidence would support that you're a burden? What evidence doesn't support that? And then, is there a more compassionate, accurate story to who you are? That
Yeah,
is so true of today. If we were to ask ourselves those as we walk around before we go into a work meeting, before we parent, before we show up at the gym, of again, what evidence supports the thought in my head? What evidence doesn't? And then, is there a more compassionate, accurate story to what I'm telling myself? That moves mountains for us and allows us to find healing. So,
that's really helpful for today's scenario. So thank you. I think the other piece is just back to some other shame stories. The loudest storytellers, something we put in here is shame doesn't say I did something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong.
yeah.
It's really good. I talk about a nugget there. There's some of the common shame-based stories. I'm behind. If they really knew me, they'd leave. This would all fall apart. I should be stronger by now. My needs are a burden. I think these are some really common ones and worth adding in addition to the gendered stories we carry as well. So those are my parting thoughts. But let's take it out with 60 seconds to center.
So shame isolates and storytelling reconnects. Being part of community reconnects.
Mm,
And so really reminding ourselves through the practical tools of writing that down, even on a sticky note or a note, a napkin, something like that, of what is the story that I'm telling myself and what's the evidence for it? What's the evidence against it that doesn't support it? And then how can I be kinder in the delivery? So that's something to think about that we just talked about. But another 60 seconds to centered is how often do I say I am, to your point? I'm a
mm,
failure. I'm a terrible mom. I'm a lazy person. I am whatever, and replacing the I am to an and hopeful statement. So, for example, I am lazy. I could say, this is hard and I'm still here.
yeah,
Or I am a burden because of what my past has told me. I could say, my past explains me, it doesn't define me. Or I am unable to move forward. I can carry this and still move forward. And then the last one would be, I'm never going to get better.
yeah,
I'm never going to amount to something. That gets told to a lot of people as children, or we perceive it as children.
yeah.
And so changing it, instead of I'm never going to amount to someone, we say, I'm allowed to rewrite my story. We start to give ourselves practical tools. They're action based. And so removing the I am negative, I am shame based, whatever follows that, I am dot dot ellipses, it then turns into I am allowed to rewrite the story. I can carry this and still move forward. My past explains me, it doesn't define me. This is hard and I'm still here. So those are 4
That's good.
hope-centered stories that I want us to start moving into, and this is a shout out as we get into building out, our retreats and some of the other practical tools. These are the fun things that happen where we learn to rewrite, I am not a failure. I've chosen
Mhm.
actions that have really hurt myself and others, or I missed the mark here, and I'm continuing to put one foot in front of the other. Better today than yesterday. Some of those things of just starting to rewrite with a hope-filled story. So, all right, storytelling will be something that we come into often as we move into 2026. John and I both talked about that, of how shame shackles and has shackled us in our own narratives, and we'll dig into this more in 2026. Anything else as you send us off, John?
Oh, we're gonna make the year better than it's starting with both our families sick. Okay, to
Cheers
that
to
point
that.
today. All right.
Yeah, cheers, y'all. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next
Cheers. Until
Wednesday.
next time.